Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about how game mechanics can transform how we learn. Leveling up in real life takes more than just discipline, passion, and even trying to level up others. It really just takes smart design. So, in this episode, we're going to explore how game design principles can help us, devs, and other creators develop practical life skills, reframe personal challenges, and even learn more effectively from that process. So, today, we're just going to unpack how instructional design and even narrative systems can turn real world friction into real momentum. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with us I have Micah Greenleaf. Micah, how's it going, bud? And thanks for being here.
Going well. Happy Thursday. Good to talk, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, for those of you who don't know Micah, he is an instructional designer at Thrivent, but he's also the CEO of Adult U, and it's the first ever gamified life skills learning platform. Micah, I gotta know what does this mean? Like, I know we're gonna talk about it some more. It's a big proponent of our our conversation, but what is Adult U, and what is it that you guys are changing in the industry?
Sure. Well, I'll give you the 5-second elevator pitch, which is it's essentially Duolingo for adulting. What we're doing is creating a platform that makes it easier to understand what skills and knowledge can help you in adult life. Trying to make it easier for people who are learning to be independent adults, whether you're in high school, college, or maybe you dropped out of high school or college. Regardless, I think that everybody deserves the same access to opportunity and to the skills that are required to succeed, both financially, socially, personally. And Adult U is going to be the home of learning and resources that support that.
Awesome. And I'm sure there's like so many other things that like this can help with too, in terms of, learning perspectives and everything else. And again, this is what we're going to get into in a moment. But you have a pretty interesting background too. Outside of what your focus is on now, you've also, you've been the narrative lead and marketing director for some places. You developed similar types of learning styles for other types of companies and everything else. This is something that's in your wheelhouse, you're into, and through working in games to some capacity, it's like sounds like it came to a natural culmination of all these cool and exciting things. And just a quick fun little story. How we met was, at GDC. You were one of the conference associates there when I was prepping my talk, which was a great experience, honestly. You and the other gentleman that was there with us too, the audio tech, but in particular. And hey, because of those conversations, we're here now. So that's always fun and exciting. And just out of curiosity, what did bring you to GDC?
So a few years ago, I was making my career transition. So you pointed out that Adult U is kind of the culmination of a journey, and you couldn't be more right with that. I was going to the Harvard Extension School for an instructional design grad certificate. And I took a game design course, and my professor recommended that I look at the conference associate program and could potentially get me to go to GDC. And that first year, I was just looking to connect with the gaming industry and be more involved. What I didn't expect to find was peers like I'd never had them before. People who were interested in solving social issues using games, using education, psychology, and all the amazing lessons and interactivity that the world of games has to offer to help people. So I've been there 3 years now as a conference associate. I hope it's the first three of maybe 50. So it's become a second home to me.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and it's such a great story too in terms of, you know, how just that experience, but also like the journey and everything else can lead into so many other things. So, well, appreciate you sharing that because I know I wasn't aware of that until just now, anyway. So I was just naturally curious. But in light of getting to know you a little bit more too, we have this thing here on the podcast called the Q Box Round, and folks of for those of you who aren't familiar, we just have a few series of random questions prepared here for Micah today. So, Micah, so we can get to know you a little bit more, are you ready for the Q Box round?
Hit me.
All right. What's the most common mistake you see devs or studios make with their games?
Mm. So I'm going to focus primarily on indie studios and indie devs. That's the part of the industry that I can speak best to, as well as I think the area where people need the most help or where there's the least clarity. But one of the pieces of advice that I've gotten and that I'm really taking to heart with my own projects is that you should treat your volunteer, unpaid, and hobby projects like they're your real job. Now, I don't mean that in the sense that if somebody is not paying you and you're doing an unpaid internship, you should give them everything. I mean, we don't want to fall into the toxic workplace environment that can produce. But when you have a side project that you're passionate about, or if you're working with some friends to try to build a game, one of the biggest challenges or biggest risks of failure that I've seen is people falling off in terms of consistency, giving that time every week into it, communicating and setting goals, trying to meet those timelines and meet your goals. It's good to be flexible and it's good to work with everybody's individual needs. But the truth is, if you're doing unpaid work, paid work is always going to get in the way and take priority. That's true. But you need to treat your unpaid work as if it's paid. Because if you take it seriously, not only will you get it done faster, but also to future employers and collaborators, the fact that you're able to self-motivate and self-structure to complete something that can take hundreds of people and millions of dollars, you made a game. Even if it's just you and it's just 3 levels and it's got 2D art that you found online, you still made a game, and that means something. So treat it like a real job.
Absolutely. All right, next is, what is your biggest gaming pet peeve?
So I got 2 answers for this one. It's one of them is as a gamer, the other one is as a gamification designer. But as a gamer, I hate the grind. I hate the grind, random loot drops, pay to win. I mean, I'll shout out one of my favorite games of all time, which was Destiny. And during the pandemic, I got back into Destiny 2. But guess what? I wasn't working then. I didn't have a full-time job. And Destiny at the time very much felt like a full-time job. And the sense of FOMO, and you have to have the best year for the meta. And that just drives me nuts because most people don't have the time to play a game like it's a full-time job. And it means that I didn't get to spend as much time in that world as I would have liked.
And then, so I know you said there's that one, and then what was the other one that was not gaming related?
So for gamification, and this is whether it's at a company or a credit card reward scheme or any sort of gamification of a non-game system, when people have reward schemes that have nothing to do with the reason you're playing the game. For example, if you show up to a cruise and they say, hey, for every time you go to one of our activities, we're going to give you a badge. And they give you this badge. And what does that have to do with anything? It's when people basically it's bad gamification. And what gives gamification a bad name is when people just slap on a badge system or a point system without thinking too much about what does that actually mean. So that's my design pet peeve.
Oh yeah, and I could see that too. It's like extremely heavy on like the extrinsic side reward systems and stuff that so extreme it's like you said, what's the point? What is
One of
this?
my favorite terms there, extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. I think, yeah, well, we can talk a bit more about that, but extrinsic motivation is very useful up to a point,
Yeah,
but then it can get in the way.
excellent. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
So I favor co-op games. These days when I'm gaming, I want to be gaming with friends. I want to be experiencing a social experience. And the game that's done that the best, and the game that I'm playing right now, is Bokura by a Japanese designer called Tokoro Nyori. Apologies for the mispronunciation, I'm sure. But it is a two-player co-op game, and it is asymmetrical gameplay. So you are experiencing the world of the game differently than the other player. And that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil it. It's very nostalgic. It's one of the most earnest and heartfelt narratives I've seen. And I recommend anybody who grew up playing a Game Boy game or playing with their friends in the woods, I recommend they pick it up and give it a shot. It's on mobile and Steam.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you sharing that stuff with us and allowing us to get to know you a little bit more. And in light of that, let's now get into the conversation why we're here. And that is, folks, to talk about how game mechanics can transform how we learn. This is something super intriguing for me and why we're here talking about it too. So to kick things off, you in light of all this, you really bring a fascinating lens to this, to learning as a whole. And I'm just curious because I know there's lots of things and ways to do this, how your system works or whatever, and we're going to talk about it too. But honestly, like, what first inspired you to approach learning like a game designer?
So I think that the answer to that question started in middle school for me when I was getting into theater. I went to undergrad at Ithaca College for theater. I wanted to be a playwright and lyricist. And in theater, you're thinking about the audience experience a lot. You're thinking about how do they feel? How do they perceive the characters and the narrative? How do you reveal that to them? And so, just like many theater people, I then went into the service industry. And once again, you're focused on the customer experience. It's not about you, it's about the customer. And so when I started getting into game design and learning design, which I did about the same time, I was thinking about the player experience for game design and the learner experience for learning design, and realizing how similar those are and how essentially focusing on your audience and focusing on the person the experience is for, rather than something abstract like your learning objectives or how easy it is for you to wake up at 9 a.m., drink coffee, and then teach in front of a class with 30 kids. When you think about the learner experience, it completely changes the design process. And so I think that's what approaching learning like a game designer is all about.
Yeah, I mean, it really is such an interesting lens to look at things. And the way I see it too sometimes, from the marketing lens is, when you approach your audience, how are you going to do it? And that's always a challenge that so many of us face, right? But then if you start looking at it from the perspective of like understanding your audience more, whether you have access to that information, that data or not, just simply providing or giving yourself the opportunity or having that mindset and thinking about it allows you to like really, even through a simple exercise, to get a sense of what that audience is operating like and everything else. And it can help provide with some clarity. And that clarity then gives you potential solutions and other things that, and it's funny because it's like what you saw is very similar to that, and a similar way of addressing problems or finding solutions and things along that line.
The way I see it is if you're creating an experience for an audience, no matter what kind of experience, if you deprive yourself of the opportunity to learn from your audience what they're looking for, you're missing out on one of the most valuable resources available to you. It's so true that if you just ask your audience, hey, what do you want? What can I do to give you a better experience? They're almost guaranteed to give you a piece of their mind. And that's maybe the most valuable thing that they can offer you.
Yeah, absolutely. As you're talking about this too, I'm a little curious, like, in terms of you talked a lot about like gamification and how it can be applied to, what you're working on and life skills and things along that line. What are some of these key game design mechanics that actually translate well into, real world learning and habit formation? Because let's face it, we're probably all trying to learn and do things the most effective way possible. And that can be kind of challenging to navigate. So how do these game design mechanics actually translate into these things that where I'm sure a lot of us are trying to do?
So I'm going to focus in on what you're saying there, especially around we're all trying to learn, we're all trying to grow. And that immediately makes me think of one of the best things about games. It's more fun to play with others, especially when your goals are aligned. And so when you're playing a game and you get to work together towards a shared goal, that's maybe one of the most satisfying experiences ever. And there's a reason for that. I mean, psychologically and culturally and genetically, we are social creatures. So why should our learning be any different than the rest of our lives? It's more fun to play with others when their goals are aligned with ours. And that's just one of the many ways we form habits. So where we form habits when we are encouraged or positively reinforced. To borrow from behaviorism and Pavlov's dog, we all know the story of the bell, and then they think there's meat coming, so they start salivating. So use those tricks to help yourself achieve your goals. That might be finding ways to meaningfully reward yourself for making effort to build good habits, even if the reward feels like it's counterintuitive. I've got a great example. I started doing Kung Fu this year as a way of staying more physically fit and active. The gym just wasn't doing it for me. I got bored. I've got ADHD. I needed a bit more engagement, and I needed there to be another layer or level. And as I started going to Kung Fu, I was really enjoying it, and I was getting a lot of intrinsic motivation, but it's hard work. And so on the way home from Kung Fu, I'd stop by Popeyes and pick up a spicy chicken sandwich. And yes, that may have been going against my fitness goal, but the way I see it is that you got to focus on building the habit, then improve your rewards system balance. So don't give up on your fitness goals if your reward is a donut or some other treat. That's totally fine. Use that. Build the habit. You can improve that later if it's still not feeling good to you. But anything that can help you build that habit, push past those first 30 days is worthwhile.
Yeah. And I like that a lot, because sometimes I think when it comes to, trying to form positive habits and such, we can get to a point where, let's say, whether it's a reward or even it's like, oh, especially if you're talking about like, being healthy and staying in shape or whatever, and you get to that point where, oh, I cheated, right? And then it's like, oh, this threw off everything. So, and then it all goes out the window, and it's like, no. It's like accept that that's okay. Like, because if you're so strict in your regiment and hard, I think it creates a lot more problems than anything else. So I love that you shared that, because I think sometimes we get to that point and say, oh, that's it. But what is that really telling us?
To put it succinctly, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
I'd rather be
Love it.
good and finished with the project than perfect and unfinished. Because at the end of the day, if you have a good product that's done, you can make it better. But if you have a perfect product that's unfinished, it doesn't even know what it is yet. So get out of your own way. Allow yourself to be less than perfect and just reward yourself.
Yeah, absolutely love it. In light of these processes and forming habits, there's a lot of methods and stuff that I'm sure some of us are familiar with that we might find not as effective. So I'm curious, why do you think, let's say, more traditional, and as you're defining it, adult education, like these, soft skills and everything else and habits, why do you think that traditional ones often fall flat? And how can we, how can gamification kind of reinvigorate it or look at it from a different lens?
I think it comes down to when you're thinking about current state of adult education, and we can talk about college is a form of adult education, on the board training is a form of education, but it typically comes down to two things. One is when the education is not aligned with the user's goal. And so this goes back to what my pet peeve was for gamification reward schemes that have nothing to do with the user's goals. It's the same thing. When you're trying to get through a class in college and you're wondering, what the hell does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with the life I want to lead? You shouldn't have to be doing that work on your own. In the learning experience, they should be showing you how relevant it is.
That was,
And
that was
games
like,
do that well.
I was sorry. I was just, that was my whole time with like math and any foreign language until I actually took what I
Yeah.
liked. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Keep going.
So yeah, that connection of how is this relevant to my own life is so important. And if you don't feel like something's relevant to your life, you're not going to pay attention to it. So number one, a traditional adult education is based in 20th century skills and 20th century subjects. When you think about a career, nobody has a career in just capital B biology or in capital H history. Within biology, you can be a lab tech, you can be a researcher, you can be a people manager. Our world isn't structured into subjects that match your colored notebooks, or at least not the subjects that they teach in schools. We can talk about adult use 8 subjects. We might have fixed that problem. But the other thing that adult education and all education often falls flat on is that failing equals bad.
Yeah.
This mindset teaches our students and teaches adults that if they're taking risks and failing, that they are worse or they are bad in some way.
And that's even become a cultural thing too, right?
Oh, and it makes a huge impact on our culture. When you're afraid to take risks and we're afraid to do things that we might fail at, we end up falling into habits that don't actually serve us. And we end up just settling for less than what our potential is. But when you realize that failing is only bad when it's the last step, I'm a believer that failing is only failing if it's the last thing you do. If you fail and you follow it up by trying something new, then you never failed. You just learned.
Yeah.
And I think that games and gamification have an approach to failure. You get to respawn. You get to try again. And the approach to failure in games can teach so much for educational systems.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, though, because I know there might be some people, or there's definitely people out there that might be thinking, okay, well, I understand how these things relate. Yeah, people are going to fail in games all the time. Like, oh, they die and that you respawn, you start over again, you hit continue, whatever the case may be. But life isn't always so forgiving sometimes. So for those extremists, I mean, what are some other ways to look at this from that positive, like, learning focus, opposed to, because again, hey, life's hard. There's going to be some hard fails, but there's never, I would say, never a point where you can't come back from something like that. What's a good outlook to have for, let's say, some people that might be in a certain situation scenario where they might be a little bit of a pessimist, and understandably so?
I think you're bringing up a really central issue to, I think, our economy, our jobs market, to America right now, which is that some people can afford to fail and others can't. And something that knocks you down may be too big to get up from. That could be medical debt. That could be losing a job. And when we have these conversations about social support networks and about benefits to lift up people at the bottom, I think we lose sight of the fact that nobody can know everything in advance. And we all make there are a lot of mistakes that we all make and misunderstandings of the system that we all make. And some of us have the resources and the privileges, whether that's our parents or our economic situation or some other aspect of our life. Some of us are lucky and can fail and have a support network that helps us get back to our feet, learn from our mistakes, and not make them again, and continue on our growth. Not everybody has that, though. Not everybody has that strong of a support system, and getting knocked down can mean getting knocked out of the system. It can mean getting knocked out of the path of success and into a different life. And when I started building Adult U, the top priority was, how do we make it easier for people to learn the lessons? I don't want people to have to learn the hard way, though there are meaningful reasons to learn the hard way. It sticks with you. But I don't want people to have to learn the hard way, especially if they can't afford to fail in that way. My number one example would be health insurance and car insurance. These are expensive, they are difficult systems to navigate, and they're very impactful. So if you're trying to save money and you don't get those policies, you might open yourself up to big risk, and you may end up with tens of thousands of dollars of debt and no car and physical injuries. And so your short-term thinking hurt you in the long run. At the other end, if you're throwing hundreds of dollars into your car insurance every month and you live in a city and you can't afford some other opportunities that, because of someone told you that you need to have all the coverages maxed out, well, that's holding you back in other ways. So long answer short, I think we need better guides for people as they're navigating adult life. And we need to create support networks that allow people to fail, but demand that they learn from their mistakes. And the balance there is what we're missing in the current discussions. Right wing is pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Left wing is everybody deserves 2 million second chances. And what we really need is somewhere in the middle, where people deserve as many chances as they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and they shouldn't have to do it alone.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that I got from that right there, because I mean, I know it was definitely a loaded question,
Yeah.
is, just simply the concept of having that support system. And not so much as, I think, the support system, I think, could consist of a lot of different things. It could be resources, it could be benefits, it could be just people and guides and things along those lines, and even as simple as friends. But sometimes, having that outlook and who your friends are and what their outlooks are, or the people you hang around with, even like people at work. One of the things I look at in these systems or ways is, if you're surrounded by people, regardless of where it is, and everybody is like, oh, this sucks, this can't get any worse, or whatever, and everybody is down, it is going to impact and affect your outlook, and you're going to be part of that bubble. You're going to be part of that shared mindset and thinking. So yeah, in terms of life happens and stuff like that, my answer, which it sounds like yours is as well, it really just comes down to that network, knowing who they are, and how is the cumulative group really looking kind of more on the positive side, to really oversimplify it, because we know it. There's lots of dynamics in this type of stuff too. But I the only reason I called out to it, because I know sometimes people are in those spaces, and when it becomes a negative thing, then it's like, hey, look, what can be done to put it back on that positive note, and then continue with your path.
And that is why one of the first modules that we're launching with is how to use your support network. And it comes back to that idea. If we feel shame about failing, then we're going to feel shame about asking for help. And there, I love the phrase, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others.
Mm.
It's the same thing here. If you want to forge your own way and go fast and try things and break things and fail and learn on your own, that's great. But we can't always do that. That's not always sustainable. And relying on your support network and knowing what that is a really crucial part of getting through hard times and overcoming obstacles.
You know, you bring up an interesting point with that example, with that quote you just said, is like, you know, if you want to go alone, if you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go with others. I mean, in light of that, I'm curious in how it relates to the work you're doing, what we're here talking about. You know, how do you go about balancing, you know, different types of engagement with, like, you know, depth when you're designing these like learning experiences for people? Because I can imagine it could be quite a bit of work trying to figure out what's the right recipe, you know?
Super fair. And we've tried to tackle that at Adult U. This is actually one of our kind of bigger changes that we're making to the gamified learning approach. Because you think about your options for learning online right now. You go to a YouTube video and maybe you're watching a short. I mean, these days we're all obsessed with TikToks and short videos.
Right.
So that's very accessible, very engaging, but you can only learn so much. You can only get so deep. Then you have a layer above that, maybe a 6-minute, 8-minute, 20-minute YouTube video. And of course, there are also hour-long ones. Go a step beyond that, and you might go to Coursera or edX or take an online course of some sort, which is, of course, the biggest commitment. And they all have their advantages. They all have their place. And with Adult U, what we've tried to do is have both a modular system and a variable length system. So I'll break it down as simply, as concisely as I can. We break down adult life into 8 branches of adult life. And so these are your new subjects of adult life. And then within those, we have modules. And every module is one topic. That could be graduating college and moving to a new city. It could be getting your first apartment rental. It could be, if we're looking at the Citizen U arc, you could be voting for the first time. The financial you could be investing for the first time, opening up a credit card. Every single module is one topic. And the knowledge section in those modules can be done in one of 3 sizes. We've got the root, shoot, and bonsai, since we have a tree theme throughout the product. And the root is a 5-minute experience. TikTok video, a little text, a voice read text option, and some key takeaways. Then you get to the shoot. That's a 20-minute option. And so you go a little bit more in depth. You get context. You get you get more engaged with the concepts. We break it down into questions you should ask, information you should have, and resources you should use. And then we have the bonsai, which is an hour-long learning experience. And that we use articles, videos, custom exercises. This is all, and regardless of the length you choose, you get the full module experience. So do you have 5 minutes, 20, or an hour? And if you do that 5 minutes and you want more, great. Then you move on to the 20-minute, and you can move on to the 60-minute. So allowing people to choose how much time they spend and giving them an easy bite-sized beginner, let's call it an appetizer at the beginning, allows people to make that choice themselves.
You know, I love this breakdown, kind of the system, and even the analogies that you use that can be relatable on probably so many different levels for people. And one thing I want to call out to folks, for, you know, anybody who's listening and is like, well, how does this relate to me or my team or whatever? You know, as you're sharing that, what came to mind for me was, oh, I actually do somewhat, not in depth, but processes with, you know, my clients. Because one of the things I have people go through is this questionnaire, and some of the questions are, what are the best ways that you learn, right? Or communicate. And at its core, what I'm trying to understand is like, do you have regular stand-up meetings that are part of like a sprint? Are you horrible to be productive after you had like, an hour call or meeting? Can you do you want the details and go into a really in-depth document, or would you rather just have it summarized? Everything that you just outlined is very similar to this. And if folks, if you have teams, whether they're small teams, micro teams, or bigger, medium sized, these are all things that can really make all the difference in, effectiveness and streamlining procedures and helping with project management, and thus equating to business goals and all these other things. So it's I think it's just so interesting to hear these processes and how else they can be applied in varying ways, and they are super impactful. But it's funny because when you really boil it down, it just comes down to like how we communicate and understanding what are the most important methods and ways to communicate with whoever it may be, so we can better develop our systems and then, achieve our goals.
And it's just what we were talking about earlier in terms of meet your audience where they're at and ask your audience what they want, ask them what they need. I mean, as a professional, you're consulting with potential clients and you're getting to know them. How do they work? What are their goals? What language do they use? Getting on the same page with your audience is such an important part. And I think as we get deeper into these topics, we'll see that design approach of understanding the goals, understanding the audience is something that you can bring into just about any part of your life, whether it's your business, your game, or something more personal.
So then that said, it sounds like you're almost living life, right? With this approach. But like, I don't know, what does that actually mean in practice? Like what does that mean?
Some of the most compelling and the most meaningful takeaway I've had from getting involved in the design world is that design is always purposeful. It's got an outcome in mind or an objective. And when I'm working with clients, when I'm working with collaborators, we always try to define that purpose first, so that whenever we have a disagreement or whenever we get stuck on something, it's not about, do I like it? Do you like it? It's about, does it serve the purpose? Because we can always look back to that. Life doesn't really have that. It's very much an open world gaming experience where there is no boss level. There is no set quest line. It's completely up to you. And one of the things that games do so well, and the thing that I would encourage people to bring into their own life, is that you should live a life with purpose. And that can mean mindfulness, that can mean spirituality, that can mean gamifying your life. The way I see it, it almost doesn't matter what your purpose is, whether that is a purpose for you now and for the next 6 months, or a purpose for you over the course of your entire life. If you live a life that is focused on achieving some purpose, then you will feel more satisfied, and you will find that the challenges you come across have meaning, because challenges that we come across on the way to achieving our purpose end up becoming learning opportunities. And sometimes they help us change the direction that we're pursuing our purpose with. Sometimes they teach us more about that purpose that we didn't already know. But that just identifying some purpose to hold on to, that really makes a big difference.
Yeah. And as you're calling out to that, one thing that I was thinking of is this purpose can actually have, create opportunities. It can create a compound effect. I mean, there's a book with that title, The Compound Effect. And I can't remember the author, but it's on the shelf behind me. But through that process and what they write out and the examples they provide, it's like it's because of that purpose. And it could change. Like you were just saying, Mike, it could change from 6 months. It could change again. It's like, it's no different than a goal, but just a little bit more, it's direct, but maybe a little bit more abstract so it can be molded or shift and change as you do as a person. And then, but through that, it's really interesting and cool to see how this compound effect or these other opportunities start presenting themselves in ways that you might not have ever imagined before. Something as
Ways that you
simple as
couldn't imagine before,
yeah,
because
yeah,
the process of pursuing your goal will uncover things. None of us knows everything, thank goodness. And you're going to be discovering things along the way. And I think one of the biggest differences between a winning mentality and a losing mentality is the willingness to pivot and
yeah,
to update. I don't mean I don't mean flip-flopping on your beliefs. It's good to have some things you stick by, but being able to admit, you know what, I didn't know what I was talking about, or I thought I knew what I was talking about, but then I got this new information and now I see things differently. Not only does that help you to pivot and find a more successful route or a plan of attack, it's also maybe one of the most attractive things, both from a professional and a personal standpoint. When someone says, hey, I thought this was going to work, and I have realized in the process of pursuing it that there were some things I overlooked and I need to try it a new way, or maybe this isn't the thing to do. If I hear that from one of my collaborators, that they have that amount of humility and self-awareness to recognize what's not working and try it from a new angle, I never want to stop working with them. What an amazing person to be around.
yeah. I mean, so many amazing things there, and you're right. And it's like, that type of relationship and everything else. I mean, it's no longer about something that's transactional. It's more about, building on that relationship and everything else. Especially if you're talking about like, something that's a customer or client facing, right? And there's a lot of value there beyond again, beyond the transactional aspects, beyond the potential other benefits that come out of it that might fall in that category, like, a referral or something. Because again, there's that element of, mindfulness that leads to something that's, ultimately fulfilling. In light of this concept of mindfulness and purpose, I mean, I'm sure we all lead. I always use kind of the words interchangeably with, intent and purpose. And I know to a degree, we all think or believe we have that right intent and everything else, right? But how can this be, let's say, appropriately built into systems of learning, like we talked about? And I know studio leaders are probably thinking ways of, incorporate or building into mindfulness, intent, purpose, all these things into their culture. But what is the right way to approach this rather than just like having this idea or something and just, kind of tacking it on without proper intent?
Yeah. Well, so first I'll say that there is no one right way. There's the right way for you, and there's the right way for you right now. And it could be different for somebody else. So it's going to look different for each of us. So just kind of a reminder that all of us are different. We all have different circumstances. And so if meditation works really well for your friend and you try it and it doesn't work for you, that's fine. It's totally different for everybody. But thinking about systems of learning, mindfulness, as we just talked about, comes back to intention. And it comes back to being present, being grounded in a specific intention. So when you're creating a learning experience, whether that is the tutorial of your game or onboarding of a new employee or education in a classroom, remind learners why they're learning by giving them opportunities to connect what they're learning to their own lives and their own goals. Now, that sometimes that requires some work. People don't always know what they want or what this is building to, especially when it's a learning experience they didn't opt into. For example, if you're in school, yes, you opted into school, but you didn't always choose all your classes. And sometimes we all need that reminder of why we're doing this. So whether that's through reflection or through application, bringing back in that why, that purpose really makes a big difference. And I want to reference one of my favorite books, Gamify by Brian Burke, is a phenomenal a phenomenal book on gamification. And he says there are three main motivators for humans and especially for adults. And most motivations and most of them come down to autonomy, mastery, or purpose. Either you're becoming more self-sufficient and more autonomous, or you're becoming better at a skill, increasing your knowledge, increasing your mastery of something. We love feeling like we're getting better at something. We love being able to do things on our own. So that's mastery and autonomy. And the third one simply is purpose. And purpose is always something outside of ourselves. Purpose can mean a higher calling. It can mean a social calling. Again, we're social animals at the end of the day. So that purpose usually has to do with other people in our life, whether that's a family member or a community.
Nice. So it's just good to know in terms of, how you define these things and how you incorporate it. There's really no right or wrong answer, but like you even said that before, it really comes down to like just having one. And you can, even like you said before with habits, right? It's just probably at a bigger scale or a higher level where let's form the habits first and then worry about the reward, right? In this case, it's, hey, let's have that intent first. Let's have that purpose first. And then, as you move on, it could change and everything. And you're just going to keep finding different ways that make the most sense at that time in your life, in your journey, and how others share that journey with you, right? And what they're on board for. So I love that. And I think it's important to call out too, because lots of times, especially in a very simple way, when we think of goals, we're like, oh, these are rigid goals. We got to stay with them. But like we've called out to before, well, you should be able to pivot. You should be able to be flexible, because a goal is just part of the plan, but it doesn't mean like it's the only way to get to your destination. But the second we choose that, well, you know what? If there's an obstacle, let's and it gets in your way, but you're sticking to that hard plan that you put in place, well, it may take way more resources or energy or whatever to get over or through or whatever that obstacle is. Whereas if you look at it like something that's fluid, maybe that obstacle is irrelevant depending on how you change your perspective.
That ties to this psychological principle of functional fixedness, this idea that an object has just one use. So when you see a brick, you say, oh, all right, well, that's a brick. That's for building. That's for making a wall out of. Somebody else could use it to break a window, or you could use it to pantomime being on the phone, or you could use it to stand a little taller. We box ourselves in to specific meanings and to specific ways of interpreting the world and how things, quote unquote, should be. And if we let go of that, then we open ourselves up to a lot more possibilities. And the book that I'm reading right now, Good to Great, has
Jim Collins.
Phenomenal book. Recommend to anybody who's interested in the world of business and growing their own company. One of the phrases I've stolen from him is, planning is essential. Plans are useless.
Mm.
And I love this idea, because planning is when you go back to, all right, what's the point of this? You're thinking very mindfully, very intentionally. You're taking an eagle eye approach. And then you zoom in and you do the actual thing. And you need to trust yourself to follow the plan, as well as to recognize when the plan's no longer working and it's time to go back to that planning stage.
Love it. I know we're approaching time here, but before we go, I'm just curious, what advice do you have for indie creators who really just want to bring intentionality, into the experiences they design, whether it's, for games or, real life.
I'll give you an entire grad certificate worth of education in 3 sentences.
All right, let's hear it.
So this is the backwards design approach, which is an approach I learned from Harvard in instructional design. And it's something you can apply to just about anything. And it has 3 steps. 1, decide your learning objectives and your outcomes. So this is what we talked about. Set your purpose, set your goal. 2, figure out how you'll know you've achieved that goal. So this is the assessment, or this is the milestone. This is, if you're doing a race, this is your finish line. And then, only then, do number 3, which is build the activities and learning experiences to support that. Because when you start with your purpose and your outcomes, and then you decide how you'll know that you're there, then everything that you build after that comes back to those points. If you're building a class and it doesn't fulfill that assessment that you decided, if, let's say, you decide the purpose of your class is to teach people how to fix their car, and the assessment you've come up with is you're going to give them a broken car, and their job is to identify what is wrong with it and fix it themselves. Then when you're figuring out your course load, you're figuring out what are the smaller skills, what's the knowledge that they need in order to perform that final assessment task. It all comes back to the previous step. So your activities support your assessment, and your assessment supports your goal. If you use that framework and you always start with understanding your goal first, you're going to find that your experiences are more intentional, whether they're in real life or in your own game design.
I absolutely love that. And, I'm sure that's something we can relate with to a bit, but like to really focus and dive deep and think of these things, backward design, and kind of like think of the why. What's that intent? What's the reason? Okay, great. A goal. Awesome. Why? Right. And then in asking yourself those things, a lot starts to reveal itself. So, this has been great. We, covered quite a bit today, but in light of that, I mean, what are some like tips, suggestions, based off of our conversation that you would like to share with our listeners today?
I think if you're going to take away anything from this conversation, it would be, 1, to treat your volunteer hobby and unpaid game developing like it's it's a full-time job. So take your passions as seriously as you take your professions. 2, decide on your objectives and outcomes at the beginning. And whenever you get stuck, go back to them. So I'll apply that to real life too. If you're ever feeling lost, frustrated, stuck, maybe it's your job or your living situation, your relationships, platonic or romantic. Think about, why am I in this? What do I want for myself? What do I want the outcomes to be? And is the behavior that I'm engaging in, are the patterns and habits that my life is made up of actually serving that? And when the answer is yes, don't change a thing. And where the answer is no, hit up that backwards design process and start problem solving.
Awesome. That is great. Solid stuff right there. Micah, I really can't thank you enough. If people wanted to connect, find out more about Adult You, how can they do that? What are some links you can drop us?
Absolutely. So you can head to adultyou.com. That's adultyou.com. And right now there we have a survey trying to understand what people are interested in learning about. You fill that out and pop in your email and we'll put you on our list, because this fall, I'm very excited to announce, we will be launching our first platform beta. That means there are going to be free life skills learning modules with accompanying games. These are custom games that we're creating to teach you real life skills like SMART goals and budgeting. So if you're interested in being a part of that beta experience and staying up to date with what Adult U is doing, just go to adultu.com and drop us your email, and we'll keep you in the loop. You can also reach us at connect@adultu.com or go to micahgreenleaf.com to see what I've been up to and learn a bit more about how Adult U got to where it is today.
Awesome. Well, Micah, again, I really can't thank you enough. These types of conversations don't happen enough in this industry. So it's truly an honor to have you on the show and share these insights, the work you're doing, and really get a better understanding of how this can help us for the long run. So again, can't thank you enough for being here and sharing this with us today.
And thank you, Andrew, for having me. I love having these conversations, and I think it's conversations like these and podcasts like yours that help us as a society work together to improve our own lives and improve the systems that we're developing. So always happy to have a chat, and I hope it's not too long before we do this again.
Awesome. We'll appreciate it. Thanks. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.